Hi, everybody. I can't see you all at the moment, which is probably just as well. It might be slightly overwhelming, but firstly, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you all. We are officially a sellout, which is fantastic. Just want to introduce myself. My name is Josephine Collingwood. I'm the membership secretary of the Outdoor Writers and Photographers Guild. I wanted to sort of outline what the Guild is all about. It's the only UK-based association of media professionals working in the outdoors. So in other words, we are a group of writers, editors, photographers, broadcasters, journalists, podcasters, filmmakers, artists, publishers. We all have a passion for the outdoors, and we work to promote it sustainably and to everyone. We're always seeking new members to reflect changes in the outdoor media industry. The benefits of membership are many and varied. Do have a look at the website, but we basically support each other. There's so much experience out there. We do CPD and mentoring, all sorts of stuff to help everybody. So although we have a monthly Zoom program, this Zoom webinar is our very first open event, inclusivity being the key word. So this Zoom will be about an hour long with a question and answer session at the end. Please use the chat function to put forward your question. We'll collate them and present them at the end as a separate sort of add-on session. So about 8 years ago, I was walking on my own on Dartmoor, which I do quite a lot. I met another woman walking along on her own on Dartmoor, and that's not as common as you would like to think, perhaps. So a brief conversation ensued, and I made a mental note to remember her name, and her name was Mary-Ann Ochota. So here we are several years later. Mary-Ann is now an OWPG member. She's hillwalking ambassador for the British Mountaineering Council, patron of the Ridgeway National Trail, and she writes regularly for the Great Outdoors, Trail and Countryfile magazines, Country Walking and national newspapers. She's written numerous books on British archaeology and appears on radio and TV. So it just remains me to say it is my great pleasure to hand over to Mary-Ann and her quest to write inclusion into the outdoors. So over to you, Mary-Ann, and thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Josephine, and thank you to the OWPG for inviting me to offer this session. The kind of rough structure that I'm going for is that I'm going to talk a bit. I'm going to kind of define some terms. I'm going to explore some solutions. And then what I think is really important, given the breadth and diversity of the ideas that can be explored in this kind of subject, to throw it open to us as a community of people who are interested, who are passionate about making progress and making good things happen, so that we can actually share solutions. I've got the great fortune and privilege of being able to hold this platform, but I think that everybody's contribution is where the real wealth and richness of this session will come in. So I'll make sure that we have plenty of space. And for that, we will invite people to turn their video cameras on again after I've kind of done my bit with slides. You don't have to obviously turn your vid on, but if you want to, please do. Also, bear in mind that I probably won't be able to look at the chat while I'm talking on account of my brain not being able to hold all those jobs at once. But some of the other members of the Outdoor Writers and Photographers Guild, Josephine, who you've just met, Julia, Felicity in the background, will be moderating the chat, but also offering ideas and thoughts. But if you feel comfortable to kind of throw in ideas and kind of explore ideas in the chat whilst also listening to what I'm saying, then do crack on. And I absolutely hugely look forward to reading it back afterwards. All right, brilliant. Let's get going. I'm going to share my screen. That's the first challenge. Hey. Okay, so the first question, I guess, is have we got a problem? When I wrote the kind of blurb for this session, I kind of thought I'm just going to state that the outdoors has a diversity problem and everyone's going to agree with me. But obviously, every now and then people don't agree with me. Outrageous idea, but there we have it. So I'm going to start with saying, yes, there is an issue. I can't obviously, I realised that I didn't turn my Outlook off, so you're going to get a set of pings. I can't cover every single aspect of diversity because we'd be here for a kind of 2-day diversity and inclusion course. But let's start, for example, with perhaps the most visible aspect of identity, which is ethnicity in the UK. Well, this is actually England and Wales. So this is data from the 2021 census. The vast majority of people are white, yes, 81.7%, of which 74%, give or take, identify as British white, which means that you've got just over 6% of people who are white other. This is all self-selecting. 97% of people who completed the census filled in this bit. So some people went, I'm not getting involved with that. But the kind of thing that I basically want to say with that is that even when we're talking about the majority ethnic group in the UK or in England and Wales, we need to be conscious, I think, always of who is that really, because people get lumped in. And we're going to kind of deal with some of the other terms that come up in conversations about diversity and inclusion in just a second. But for example, the hidden minorities within white people are people who aren't British, who perhaps don't speak English as a first language or perhaps speak English as a fluent language. We have Jewish people, people who are Gypsy, Roma or Traveller. That's sometimes shortened to an acronym of GRT. So if you see that, that's Gypsy, Roma, Traveller. Even within Asian, Rena Yassin, who's a youth worker and a campaigner for equity and inclusion in the outdoors, who's based in Greater Manchester, said, you know, I'm from a Pakistani British background. She lives in Greater Manchester and works with lots of young people in the area of Ashton-under-Lyne. As part of the Ashton Youth Club. And she said it's really tricky because when I speak to people in my community and I'm talking to an auntie, the mother of a girl who's coming to our youth club, and we're talking about going to the Peak District to go climbing, to go canoeing, to go hiking and camping, what is relevant to my interaction with that person is because we have shared community, not because I'm Asian. Asian, again, is a catch-all term. And I think we should always be mindful of some of the terms that are used in demographic data gathering, like BME, are not welcomed by communities who might otherwise be described as such by those data gatherers. So I, for example, am mixed race. My mum is Indian, my dad is Polish. In some circumstances, I'm white passing. That's another term that you might come across. I'm not... In other circumstances, people will notice the difference in colour of my skin to the majority of British people, and that will be an identifying feature that changes our interaction. There are obviously lots of other aspects of identity that are beyond ethnicity, and this is just a handful. Now, this I've taken from the British Mountaineering Council EDI, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy that they published last year, 2022, sorry. Because I work with them, I kind of thought I'd pick them as an example of, is there a problem? Yes, there is. So this is the data of the population of England and Wales. Just over 18% of people are not white. Just under 18% of people identify as having a disability. There's LGBTQ plus people, just under 4% of those people. Again, that might be partly, some of these figures are to be taken with a degree of, what's the word? might not be fully representative, because some people might not want to declare, for example, that they are trans or that they are queer. About 29% of people in our England and Wales are under 25, and just over 50% are women and girls. Okay, so how does that compare to, for example, a representative organisation, the BMC? Well, just to break this down, this little diagram shows that for the board, the staff and members, and then in the different disciplines that the British Mountaineering Council represent, indoor climbing, outdoor climbing, mountaineering and hill walking, how close is their membership, engagement or staff or board to the national averages? I mean, is the representation proportionate to the number of people who identify in those different aspects in the wider population, in the widest population? And if you can see a red box, it's because there's a greater than 25% difference between the identity of the people who are members of the BMC or a member of the board or a staff member. Orange or amber is within 10 to 25% difference of the population data, and green is within 10% difference. So give or take, depending on which of the 80,000 plus members of the BMC are kind of active subscribers at that given moment, not doing too badly. So for example, in staff, there is about a 50-50 split. 47% of BMC staff are women. This was at 2022. Whereas, for example, is there a representation of people who are not white in any of the activity disciplines? No. Indoor climbers, 6%, outdoor climbers, 5.6, mountaineers, 3.7, hill walkers, 4.3. It's a bit paltry. And so that's why part of the reason they had this sort of real drive to identify an EDI strategy, because one of the things that you need to do is sort of start with a baseline. Say, actually, let's do a critical audit. Where are we at? How bad are things? I think the most anecdotal way of explaining what I see as a problem with diversity in the outdoors is that if you came across a school group in one of our national parks, for example, on a outward bound weekend or week at the end of year 6, which lots of youngsters get a chance to do at the end of their primary schooling, look at the ethnic diversity of that group of youngsters. Look at the diversity in terms of physical and hidden disabilities. Look at the diversity of the way they're engaging with the outdoors, and then take a sample of the people who you would otherwise see in the outdoors or in an outdoor media publication. If the people that you see going hill walking, mountain biking, canoeing, stand-up paddleboarding, whatever your flavour of activity is not as diverse as walking through Leeds train station or seeing that group of youngsters doing their bronze DofE or on their outward bound education week, then we've got a leaky pipeline, because those youngsters were really enjoying themselves that week when they were 10, but have stopped doing those activities at the point that they are adults, making choices for themselves. Now, why do people stop is what kind of one of the big questions that we're not going to cover here in great depth, because otherwise I'd fill up all my time. But I think one of the things is partly physical barriers, partly access. So, for example, more ethnically diverse people live in urban areas, which might mean that they are further away from green and blue spaces. They are further away from national landscapes and national parks, for example. But one of the things that I would caution as well is that do not make the assumption that people who are in a minority that is underrepresented currently in outdoor media or in the outdoors more generally are necessarily impoverished. There's loads and loads of people who of colour who have loads of disposable income, who live very comfortable middle-class lives and have the capacity to buy much nicer waterproofs than I do. So be mindful of equating underrepresented or underserved groups with outreach to people who are struggling with poverty, because that is false. I think when we're talking about outdoor writing, photographing the outdoors, editing and commissioning, the people who are buying guidebooks, buying glossy magazines, engaging with content online, I think it's probably comfortable to a greater or lesser extent to assume that they can afford to get to places, that is not the reason that there's a barrier to access. The barriers to access are more hidden and more complex. It might be about welcome, it might be about representation, it might be about role modeling, it might be about what stories that are being told about the outdoors and in the outdoors that might make that person or that group of people feel welcome and included or otherwise. Okay, so what is it, how might one approach equality, diversity, or equity, diversity and inclusion? I think the most compelling description I've come across was from Yasmin Lazarus Kennedy, who's a member of the All the Elements network. She's also a rock climber. And she says that everyone should be a Jedi. We should all be fighting for justice, equity, diversity and inclusion. Now, big words, but what do they all mean? Okay, well, the first, looking at equality and equity and justice, is very well represented in this little diagram. So the first, on the left-hand side, you've got everybody being treated equally. Everyone has a little box to stand on, but the little short fella on the right-hand side still can't see the ball game. Now, the middle box demonstrates equity, that what you're doing is individuals are being given different levels of support in order to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. So it's not about being given equal support, but being given equal access. So some people need additional support to be able to reach that level of equity. In the third image, the one on the right-hand side, what we're looking at is that you don't need supports or accommodations made for any of those three individuals to watch the ball game, because what you've actually done is you've dismantled the systemic barrier, which was that big wooden fence. So that's kind of what we're all aiming towards, although someone made the point, Mohammed Dalek, who's the EDI champion for the British Mountaineering Council, who's also a researcher in equity and access in the outdoors. He made the point that actually, even with this right-hand image, you've got someone doing it to those people. You've got someone dismantling the fence for them, whereas actually, and you're letting them see the game. Whereas actually we need to change the system so that everybody is part of the dismantling and the addressing of the system, so that everybody is genuinely treated with justice. So it's a real case of, rather than trying to level the playing field, it's about creating a space where the obvious answer is justice for all. So a lot of these terms get bandied around: diversity and inclusion, integration. And I think this is another really good little diagram that kind of explains and unpacks some of these themes and terms. So inclusion, diversity is where minoritized groups, so people who have some aspect of their identity, whether that's their gender, their ethnicity, whether it's because they're a woman rather than a man, whether it's because they have a disability or not, they are not required to minimize aspects of themselves or miss out from aspects of activity because of those because of being able to fit. So in the diagram, what we've got is fitting into the circle. So one option is assimilation. Everyone can fit in as long as you follow the rules of the majority and everyone becomes a green dot. Exclusion is when the colourful dots are excluded from the role of, from the space that is held by green dot folk. And integration is those people, those colourful dot people, are enabled to be in the space, but they're doing their own thing. Now, sometimes what are sometimes described as affinity groups are a really important part of the journey towards inclusion. So an affinity group, for example, Black Girls Hike, or Black Trail Runners, where a group is designed, or East and Southeast Asians Outdoors, ESEA Outdoors, EC Outdoors, are designed to create support and create a community where people feel safe, welcomed, can develop skills and competence together with peers, and share experience, as well as find space in that broader white majority or straight majority or able-bodied majority society in which we live, in the outdoors particularly. Inclusion lifts everybody into the space. Now, bear in mind, though, that that isn't about kind of welcoming people in or letting them in. It's about bringing diversity to every aspect of those decision-making, gatekeeping, power-sharing experiences. So it's in leadership and development of ideas. In context of outdoor media, it's if you've got a full white, able-bodied, active staff who run your publication, or your whole writing roster is straight white men, then letting a woman write for the magazine might not be enough of a solution. Well, it certainly isn't enough of a solution. You have to ask yourself, well, who's in our editorial board? Who are making the decisions who gets to be part of this organisation, who gets to be part of this publication? Are we actually building, are we integrating diversity and inclusive practice into our DNA, or is it just a strand of a thing that we do where everything else is business as usual? Bear in mind, another term that you'll come across is intersectionality. So there's the idea of intersectional identities. You'll have heard that term, I'm sure, which is that in my blunt terms, you're not just one colour of dot. You're a swirl of colours, because we all have different identity aspects, and they will influence our experiences in any given circumstance in different ways. So, for example, for example, I'm a woman, yes, but I'm able-bodied, yes. I own my own home, yes. I have access to a car. I went to university. I do not live with a disability, for example. I did not grow up with care experience of being looked after as a child. I grew up with my family. So I have certain aspects of my identity that will come to the fore in any given circumstance or interaction, sometimes possibly to my benefit, sometimes something that I need to be mindful of. And each of our experiences in each different circumstance are quite unique. However, this brings us to the next, oh, hang on, what have I done there? Brings us to the next term that I think comes up quite a lot and is often quite misunderstood, which is the idea of privilege. Often it's described as, when we're talking about racial characteristics, white privilege. I much prefer, because I think it's much less open to misinterpretation, the idea of unearned advantage. Now, this comes from, oh, hang on, I've lost my bit of paper. Where have I lost it to? I'll find it in a minute. This comes from the National Seed Project, and the idea of unpacking the invisible knapsack. So, privilege. Some aspects of your identity may give you unfair advantage. Some may inflict unfair disadvantage. Now, privilege, this is the really important bit, isn't about being rich. It's not about being posh. It's not about having it easy. So it's not, if someone throws the idea that you live with white privilege, that's not them saying that you're rich, posh, and you've never had a problem in your life. It's about saying that the system or culture that we live in consistently means that there are certain aspects of life or experience that you do not face discrimination or disempowerment. And it's because of that aspect of your identity. So, for example, I spoke to some of the members of Black Trail Runners, and some of the team who are based in London said they always, particularly the young men, always wear technical running kit when they go running. they're training to run, for example, I don't know, a sub 3-hour marathon, or they're training for a big trail run, they will always wear technical running kit. They won't ever just go for a run in a pair of tracksuit bottoms and a hoodie. And I said, why not? And he said, because otherwise it looks like I'm running away from the police and I might get stopped and searched. In fact, it's pretty likely. In some districts in London, I will get stopped, or I am at greater risk of harm or violence coming to me because it looks like I'm running. Not running, not fun running, not recreational leisure sports activity running, but running away running, doing something bad running. And I had never realized that making fashion decisions, as I would see it, is actually, in some circumstances, a life or death matter. So that's the kind of privilege that I'm talking about, that there's an aspect of my identity that enables me to have never had to make that decision or to navigate those difficult waters. The flip side of that is that you could be there's always some aspects that may empower, some aspects that or may mean that you acquire unearned advantage. There will be other aspects that mean that you acquire unfair disadvantage. So there may be aspects that are kind of playing in tension to one another, and we are never one colour of dot. We are a beautiful, beautiful mix. Now, one of the other questions that, one of the other themes, this is, I think, a really lovely diagram that explains and explores lots and lots of responses to the work that I think we all need to do in terms of unpacking and addressing and creating a greater sense of equity and justice, both in the outdoor media, but in society more generally. This is a diagram that Andrew Ibrahim created, but it's inspired by a researcher and scholar called Ibram X. Kendi. And he's focused it on becoming anti-racist, but I think it serves incredibly well as being anti-discrimination of any description. So what you've got is that you've got 3 zones. Let me talk you through this diagram. The first is that there's a place where fear rules, and fear causes people to either avoid hard questions, deny a problem, or find ways to affirm a set of what are ultimately problematic beliefs. So I don't think there's a problem. Look, I'm going to talk to all my friends and they all agree that there isn't a problem. So that's that then. That's difficult, because what it inevitably means is that you are striving to only talk to people who look and think and agree with you in the first place. Beware social media and creating a feed that they curate, the social media platforms curate our feeds so as we spend more time on there, and we don't like dissonance. We don't like coming across people who disagree with us. We like being affirmed. And so you kind of need to actively work hard to find people you disagree with in a respectful way, and people who are equally respectful, but also don't share the same set of perspectives on life as you do. And that's as true about outdoor media as it is for your political feed, your news, all the rest of it. Okay, so then there's a really sweet spot, which is a learning zone where you go, okay, there is a problem. There's a leaky pipeline between those youngsters that I'm seeing enjoying the outdoors and the people that I see represented in the magazines that I write for or that I read, the feeds that we're seeing from the big outdoor brands, all the rest of it. Or the people that you might meet on the trail or on the water, wherever you are. Okay, so that you recognise that there's a problem. You start asking those questions that potentially make you uncomfortable. Going back to the previous slide, we're kind of looking at this idea of unearned advantage, and people will say, well, it's not my fault. What can I do about it? I'm a white middle-class man. I'm part of the problem. Ha ha. And you go, well, the aspect of that identity isn't problematic in its own right. Of course not. Of course not. In the same way that I'm able-bodied, that's not a bad thing. What becomes problematic or otherwise is whether I deny whether that gives me an unearned advantage in life or not. So it's what you do about it that's the kind of the question that where the problem or otherwise lies, not in the fact of your identity or who you are. So seeking out questions, understanding the privilege of being able to ignore it. For example, me being able to ignore the fact that young black men going for a run are otherwise at risk. The fact that a straight white man might not be able to identify in real meaningful ways the risks that women might feel when they're out on the trail alone, for example, or the anxiety or fear or threat that they may feel that they have to overcome in order to be able to proceed with the objectives that they want to achieve. So then what do? We educate ourselves. Thank you all for being here. And we have to remain in that vulnerable place where we go, we don't have all the answers. There are going to be mistakes that I make, but I'm going to listen and I'm going to keep trying and start moving into that growth zone where you identify how you might unknowingly benefit, and you're looking for those places where you can go, that is an issue that I hadn't realised, but now that I'm conscious of it, I can do something different. Promoting and advocating for policies and leaders that are anti-racist or anti-discriminatory in all aspects of identity. Sometimes it's just a case of sitting with discomfort and saying, actually, this is difficult and I'm not 100% sure what to do. And I think that's where the strength of community comes, that we can go, we're all on a pretty difficult journey here in so many ways of dismantling those systemic practices and societal beliefs that put some people at a deep disadvantage and others not. And then speaking out. So we're going to get into that more. And as well, this kind of, I think it's really important that making mistakes is inevitable for all of us, and don't let that deter you. We're all going to do it. Now, what kind of challenges are people feeling? Well, I've come across, I mean, when you start looking, they're everywhere, but here's a kind of good example in that it's very, very apparent and also quite complicated. Bad because it was a horrible experience for the individuals involved and for all the people who kind of bore witness to it. So the person on the right is called Danny. She's a trad rock climber. She's in this picture going winter mountaineering with the person on the left who's called Sam Leary. Sam is an instructor with Leading Edge Mountaineering. She's a guide as well, and she took Danny out this winter on the Dorsal Arête in Scotland, in Highlands. And Danny said, how many black women do you take? And are you, teaching to do kind of lead winter mountaineering, lead trad climbing, winter climbing? And Sam said, you're the first one. And Danny was astonished, given that Sam has been working in this industry and is very highly, highly regarded and has been working in this industry for decades. Danny was the first black woman that she was teaching to lead trad climb in winter. And what they proceeded to do was film a little how not to skills video, which I was going to show to you, and I can't work out how to get the blooming pictures to show. So you'll have to go and find it on Sam Leary, Sam Leary, Sam Leary's Instagram, because it's still up on there. And it's how to not place a cam in winter. Now, I'm not a climber, but having watched the video, I now know what to do. A cam is like a little thing that has a kind of spring on it. And what you do is you push it into a crack and then it expands and it jams. So then you can attach your rope to it, or and it becomes a kind of a secure point from which you can carry on climbing. Now, in winter, what you've got is ice in the crack. And if you put your cam in, it'll slide right out and therefore be very dangerous and bad placement of gear. So what they did was they filmed a little thing of this is how not to place a cam in winter. And Sam posted it, and she's quite active on Instagram. It's great, but she gets a few hundred likes on posts if it's a good post, and it is kind of gained a bit of traction. This one started to go a bit weirdly viral. It ended up being watched 7 million times by people all around the world. It was getting shared all around, and then the comments started to come in. First of all, some people going, oh wow, hey, look at that, that's cool, thank you very much for sharing that info, you look like you're having a good day out in the mountains. And then a lot of comments that Sam started to having to block and report, racist comments about black people being in the mountains. These are the comments, and I've screenshot some of them with Sam and Danny's permission, from people from the black community talking about seeing someone in the Black community up a snowy mountain. And I'll give you just a minute to just absorb some of what's been written there. For those of you who would prefer it for me to read it out, for example, there's one saying, first time I see a blah in snow. And Danny replies saying, well, I hope it's not the last. It certainly won't be my last time. Hey, she's one of them funny speaking breakfast beans eating ones, that baked beans for the people. That's what Americans call them, baked beans. She's one of those funny speaking breakfast beans eating ones, so she doesn't count. And someone's replied saying, imagine limiting your potential because of your skin colour. And someone else said, oh no, it's British, so it cancels it out. Wait, Black people do this? Yes, we do. I've been doing it for a long time. I'm the woman in the video. This is why we don't climb mountains in the winter or summer or any time. Keep your feet on the ground. And Danny, who's obviously brilliant and sassy, said, my feet are on the ground. They're just a few meters up. Other people said, have you been kidnapped by the white people? You're getting too white to be Black, really. Now, these are really difficult, and these are the least offensive ones. I was going to say nice, but they're not nice at all. They're terrible. I think this, for me, doubles down on the idea that representation really, really matters, because it's about education for all communities. It's not just education for, I don't know, perhaps less enlightened climbers who have been trad climbing and winter mountaineering going, oh, that's new, that's different. I'm going to comment on that in a deeply harmful way. It's also for people who say, oh, hang on a minute, that's not something that I thought I could do, or people like me do. And I've got a few more examples shortly. But just to reinforce that, yes, this really is a problem. And yes, we all have a part to play in addressing it. One of the things that people have said is that, oh, well, we can just ask more people from diverse backgrounds to offer more content. We can go and take pictures of them. We can get Mary-Ann Ochota, who set up Black Girls Hype, to do a talk for us and tell us about what equity and diversity and inclusion is all about. By all means, Mary-Ann's a great speaker. But there's a burden that comes with being the diverse person. And this is a little quote from a writer, and she's actually a filmmaker, Latifa Dowd, writing about arts and the creative industry. But I think it kind of perfectly captures the idea that there is a burden of having to represent for a group of people because you're the only one in the room. When you're a person of colour trying to produce art, so much of your time is spent networking, lifting people within your community up, fighting your industry against discrimination, proving that you deserve a spot at the table, and carrying the burden of representation for your people. So what that speaks to is that it's not as easy when you have a minority, someone with a minority characteristic in their identity. Constantly going to them to solve the problem that is society-wide is not a sustainable solution, because that carries with it a great burden. Okay, so let's get to a little bit of, well, what on earth do we do about this? If you look at if you're an editor and you're looking at your writing roster and you go, oh, hang on a minute, these are all the people who I've worked with for 10 years, who are just like me, who I met a long time ago, and we talk the same talk and we walk the same walk and we can share anecdotes about the various things that we do. That's great. Of course, it's great, but it's not enough. So the first step, I think, if you're a freelancer, then maybe ask yourself, how many times am I writing with the same peers for publications? Is it the same old faces and the same old names? And am I one of those faces or names? Now, for some of us, the answer will be yes. What do I do about that? Because this is my livelihood. Or I've been doing this for a long time and this is how I do it. But what we have to acknowledge is that business as usual may well not be fit for purpose. So step one is uncovering your personal as well as your organizational preconceptions and stereotypes. Now, when I say organizational, if you're a freelance sole trader like myself, at this point, still think about it as kind of what are my personally held opinions, preconceptions, prejudices, stereotypes, the ones that I'm forefront fully aware of, but also the ones that I possibly don't know that I have, except every now and then I get that jolt. If I'm trying to stay in that kind of growth and learning space of being an anti-racist or anti-discriminatory champion, a Jedi, what are the things that are making me uncomfortable that I go, oh, hang on a minute, that is a thing. Do a really critical audit. So have a think. Do you ever write with people who aren't the same kind of person as you? Maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no. When you're writing about people who aren't like you in some other aspect or more than one or the other aspects, do you write about them or do you write with them? Are there certain stereotypes that we default to? For example, one of the things that I've noticed in magazines and brand work adverts and whatnot recently is that you'll get a much greater diversity in terms of ethnicity, perhaps gender representation in kind of everyday urban, kind of the outdoor leisure wear. Whereas actually when you then look at people doing more technical things in the mountains or on the water, it tends to kind of revert to a straight, white, able-bodied, majority kind of the description of wealthy and healthy, or fit and pretty. And actually what you've got is diversity at entry level, beginner, urban walks, but you don't have diversity throughout. Danny is a perfect case in point. There is a diversity of participants throughout, perhaps not as diverse as it ought to be, but there are people out there doing stuff, but they don't get platformed. They don't get the opportunity. They don't get profiled as highly. So is business as usual fit for purpose? What kind of hidden expertise is there embedded in, for example, your submission guidelines or in the way that you share information? Often us freelancers are quite cagey, sometimes understandably, about what we're being paid, but perhaps actually if we're more transparent about these are the terms and conditions that I got this gig, then actually we can lift ourselves all up together, and that transparency will help new people who have very credible and valid a very credible and valid right to be in our industry, to get their foot in the door. Now, when you're thinking about, and I appreciate that this is more tricky, and I'd really welcome a conversation and chat about it shortly. When we're talking about, what I'm looking for is a writer who is a trusted pair of hands. I know they're going to deliver the kind of content that I want. Unpack that a little bit. Now, when you want a trusted pair of hands that is going to deliver, they're not going to be problematic, there's a problematic word. They're not going to challenge the status quo of how things have always been done. What you're expecting is assimilation. Think of those dots again. You're expecting for them to fit into our industry, they need to become a green dot. Otherwise, they don't really belong and they can stay in their colourful outwidth. I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think it's credible. And fundamentally, I think it means that our industry will suffer deeply, as will society. Publications and magazines are, for surfeit of reasons, circulations are going down. People are finding different ways to find content and information about the outdoors, finding community in the outdoors. So this isn't a simple answer to a simple problem. However, unless we embrace diversity at every single element and aspect of decision-making, leadership and gatekeeping in our organizations, as well as acting as freelancers in the industry, I think it's really difficult to defend. Diversity can't just be a subject that you cover sometimes. It has to be part of the DNA of us as freelancers, part of the DNA of the publications and media outlets that we work for. The other point is that pitching is a vulnerable place, and I think I would really advocate for the fact that when you're starting out, and this is true for everybody, of course, when you're starting out, it's very difficult and nerve-wracking to approach a publisher or editor and say, I'd like to write this article, and I think I can do it, and I think this is a good story, and you don't get an email back at all sometimes, or you get a no thanks, not for me. When you're pitching, when you're in that pitching place, that place of vulnerability, of putting yourself out there and hoping for a yes, when you're coming from an underrepresented, underserved group, whatever aspect of your identity, that vulnerability is amped up by a power of 10. It's much harder. And I think we as an industry, both established freelancers, but also those decision makers at publications, at publishers, guidebooks, editorial teams, need to really embrace the fact that you can't just expect people to rock up, do the same old, be a trusted pair of hands, understand all the hidden expertise that's embedded in your submission guidelines and know actually what that really means and be able to thrive, because it's unreasonable. And what you'll end up with is the people who are able to jump through those invisible hoops and deliver to your satisfaction will be the same old people, and you will lose the diversity and variety and depth of storytellers that are out there. And that's the bottom line. For every publication, the breadth and diversity of storytellers who are out there are not represented in the people who get published and the people who get celebrated in outdoor media. And that is fundamentally what needs to change. When you are approaching, if you are, and you should be, making positive and active approaches to people to say, we need to diversify. Once we've done a critical audit, we know where we're at, we know what issues we face, and we need to change things up. It's not about tokenism. Ask yourself who's benefiting more from them coming to you and perhaps writing for you or taking photographs for you, creating podcasts, video, whatever, assets. If it's going to be you benefiting more, then you need to realise that you need to recompense accordingly, bearing in mind the diversity, the burden of being the diverse person. Okay, so I approached all the elements, members of this community of outdoor leaders, independent people, researchers, practitioners in the outdoors who are all members of the All the Elements network. I would encourage you to go and find them because they're brilliant. They hold online socials that are open to everyone, including allies, and they cover all aspects of outdoor activity and all aspects of identity. So there are some people who are representing increasing disability in the outdoors, for example, Debbie North, who runs Access the Dales. You've got people representing diversity and conservation environmental sector. You've got people running community groups like Steppers UK or Trekkers. You've got all sorts of people coming from all sorts of backgrounds. And I said, if you had some advice of things to or things not to do for people who work in the outdoor media or commission content, what would these be? And these were the kind of the top suggestions. I have just picked just a few because there was loads of good advice. The first one was have a solid editorial stance. And again, I repeat, this applies, I think, to not just publications titles, but to us as freelancers. What is my, as a kind of Mary-Ann PLC, what's my editorial stance on the kind of stories that I write about, the people I engage with, and the kind of work that I'm doing? You can't have tokenistic, oh, here's our article about diversity, and now we're going back to business as usual, which is a bunch of white able-bodied people doing the same old things, for example. There also needs to be consistency throughout the material that you are producing and publishing. So, for example, one example that was offered by Fran Tarauskis, who runs Seize Your Adventures and the Tremula podcast network, she said, you can't, for example, have one article online that is top hikes for beginners, and what you've got is a set of routes of honeypot locations that are easy and accessible, that are close to car parks, that aren't too long, aren't too technically difficult. But then the next article that you've got on your homepage is someone complaining about how honeypots are oversubscribed, overexposed, and it's all those new people's fault. You cannot hold those two pieces of content at the same time and be authentically in this space of encouraging beginners as well as slagging them off, basically. So you need a solid editorial stance. How are we actually engaging with new members to our activities? How are we engaging with those people to tell their stories with credibility and authenticity? So one of the questions is, who are your decision makers? What kind of stories are you commissioning? What kind of stories are you looking for? What do you think is right for your audience? Are you happy with that, the diversity in your audience? Because if you're not, you probably need to start doing something different. And that's true as well for us freelancers. What kind of stories are we pitching? What kind of stories are we looking for? That requires building trust. It requires telling stories well. And that requires time in itself. So it's not a kind of one-off. Reaching out to an organization or a community group saying, hey, has anyone got a good story they want to tell? And then it being left to the dust and kind of hoping like, well, if some people turn up with award-winning writing portfolios, then great. And if they don't, then we did try. And you can tick a box and say, we did try. Tokenistic box ticking, kind of saying, oh, have we had a Black person on the cover in the last 12 months? No, better put one on. Okay, right, we've done that. Let's carry on with business as usual. Not acceptable. Doesn't actually address the issue either. And increasingly, people will call you out on it, and rightly so. Basic stuff, accessibility. So, for example, online, is your content screen reader compatible? Is it in a readable format? Has it got good color contrast for posts on social media and on your websites? Are you using alt text? Do you enable captions on videos? Are you checking the captions rather than just auto-generating them and hoping for the best? And you're not really bothered if they don't make any sense, because that's not really your problem. It is your problem because the people who require captions are your people. And so treat them with the same degree of respect as you would to copy edit the print material of the glossiest of issues that you put out. Things like kit reviews. Who's reviewing the kit? How often do you review kit that, for example, goes into plus sizes? How often are you reviewing kit that is not just the most incredibly expensive? How often are you reviewing kit that has an equal balance of men and women? Or do you have a bunch of men reviewing the serious kit and then a woman doing one girl's thing, which is pink and shrinked? Kit has improved, but I don't know how much kit reviews have. So again, do that audit. And one of the questions is, if you're one of the people writing or reviewing kit, are you always the right person to review it or test it? If not, then think about that roster of people reviewing kit, because the kit reviewers should be as diverse as the people reading your magazine. They should be as diverse as the people on the hill or on the water, and they should be as diverse as, to go back to my original description, the people walking through Leeds train station. And if they're not, then we've got a leaky pipeline and we need to resolve it and actively make positive steps to proactively address it. One of the accessibility guides that was recommended was this one at abilitynet.org.uk, and I can share all the links later if that would be helpful. Okay, so some of the things are about representation. Claire Millington got in touch with me. Her daughter is Pip, the person in the pink fleece on the left-hand side and in the very jazzy bobble hat with the pink bobble on the right-hand side. Pip has multiple disabilities, and she works with a support worker who's the other person pictured in the picture. And unlike most carers, Pip support worker is a trained outdoor instructor, because Pip loves getting outdoors. And Claire, her mum, Pip's an adult. She lives supported but independently. But Claire said, you know, one of the things that's really important to us in supporting Pip is, and to supporting families and representing families of other people who have complex disabilities, is firstly that not to default that disability is always a physical disability, that you can tick the box of someone being in a wheelchair, that a lot of disability is hidden, that it's not just physical disability. One of the other comments that came back to me from folk in the All the Elements network was that when you're representing people with disabilities, be mindful that it's not always about inspiration porn or trauma porn. So the terrible story about what happened to you and why, and what you're doing is writing a feature about someone's personal experience that is entirely separate in many ways to their experience of being a person hill walking in the Lake District, or going sailing or canoeing or stand-up paddleboarding. That actually there shouldn't have to be a reason that there is a disabled person represented or in the feature or profiled. It shouldn't always be about that person's disability or aspect of their identity. It should be simply that they are part of the matrix, part of the fabric of the people that we represent in outdoor media, just as much as I. There doesn't have to be a reason for Pip to be in the picture because I'm writing about young adults with complex disabilities using the outdoors to live fulfilling lives. She goes outside in exactly the same, for exactly the same reasons that I do, because we love it. And so maybe that is a good enough reason for her to be featured in a piece about going hill walking or this particular route in the Lake District. It doesn't need to be about her overcoming her challenges as a disabled adult. Another example, Dee Crute. Oh, apologies, Dee, I haven't put your handle on there. She has ADHD. She is recovering from, she has a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, and she runs a thing online called the Introverts Adventure Club, saying actually sometimes it's really difficult when you're dealing with hidden disability to feel like you're represented or that you're accommodated in the outdoors more generally, but also in outdoor media. And one of the points that she made was that often the article or feature on disability is the one that comes after the kind of proper glossy features. I use the word proper in very, very inverted commas, where you've got the first feature of fit and fancy or wealthy and healthy folk, and then eventually at the back pages you've got a thing about diversity and inclusion, or like, oh, here are a few other people having a go. That kind of imbalance of power, the embedded discrimination that is in that thinking that we often have because we've inherited it from society, needs to be unpacked. Why not lead with that feature? Why not lead with the feature of the person who doesn't necessarily look the stereotype of fit and fancy as your first feature? And if we have some kind of aesthetic or editorial concerns, a kind of an immediate, oh, what would happen if I did that? Then let's stop, address and unpack that, because I think it's potentially very problematic, and it unpacks, when we're doing that critical audit, some of those preconceptions and stereotypes and prejudices that we have. Why might you always have pictures of older people looking perhaps more passive, being less active in the outdoors, and the young people are off romping up hills and doing elaborate athletic things? Change it up. Demonstrate that you can be fabulously fit, healthy, active, technically capable in the outdoors. And it's not about being fabulous and 50. It's just about, here's a bunch of people who are genuinely diverse in their characteristics, and we start representing people in the wealth of different types of experience and lived experience that people bring to the outdoors. Trekkers UK, so Monique Sophia, I think you're on the call. Hi, Monique. I said to Monique, okay, so she runs Trekkers UK, by the way. Here's a picture of some of the people who go on walks with Trekkers UK. I said to Monique, so if there was a writer who wanted to write a feature, for example, me, budgets are small, I don't get paid for travel to get to the Lake District. I live in Hertfordshire. That's quite a long drive. I don't have that much time. I've got 2 small kids and a busy lifestyle. So that when I'm trying to write about the outdoors, I also want to go and enjoy the experience. And so chances are I invite one of my mates who doesn't mind being in the photos. And the majority of my friends are white, who I go hill walking with, are white, able-bodied men. Just so happens to be that way. And so what would happen if a writer approached you or members of your group and said, hi, can I invite you to come on a walk with me so I can take pictures of you? And that would diversify the pictures that I could take. And she said, well, the thing is, if you don't know me, I would say, who's benefiting more from that, me or you? And if the answer is you, then we need to talk about who's paying who. Because otherwise you're potentially using that person, it's being tokenistic to the magazine or to the publication, kind of going, oh, look, here's pictures of people of colour walking in the outdoors. If it's more authentic, then maybe you're inviting someone from Trekkers UK to write the feature. And if they don't yet have the skills and experience to write a professional feature and deliver it on time with copy covered, then maybe there's support there, peer support, mentoring, or support from the editorial teams that enables that development of a greater range of talented storytellers who are able to write for outdoor media and have the experience to do that. So that's on me as well as a freelancer. Maybe I need to be giving time to supporting and uplifting peers so that they too can do what I do. Now, of course, does that mean that I'm going to have to work harder for the commissions and that I am making space at the table and potentially stepping back from the table and saying, actually, this isn't a feature that I'm going to write? I'm in the great fortunate position now in my career to sometimes have commissioning editors come to me and say, Mary-Ann, is there an article that you want to write for our magazine? And I go, oh, I'm a bit busy. Or I go, oh, yes, actually, there is. Sometimes if I have been talking to someone like Monique or Danny or Sam or Claire and Pip, then actually I go, hang on a minute, how can I enable them to get the commission so they can get cracking with writing and diversifying the outdoors? Because what are my values? My values aren't about pulling up the drawbridge behind me, about gatekeeping who tells the stories. And it's about acknowledging deeply that not all the stories are mine to tell. Okay, so there's a really great blog. I would recommend that you go and find it after this call, written by Francesca Tarauskis, who I mentioned previously. She's written about how to interview as an ally. I'm conscious of the time, so I'll rattle through this because this is kind of bullet points lifted from that deeper article. Some of the stories that you might want to tell, some of the people that you might want to feature have an aspect of diversity to their identity. You want to represent them, you want to do the right thing, you want to be an ally. So this is a kind of an important audit, again, for how to approach people who are coming from a diverse perspective, who are traditionally underrepresented or underserved by the outdoor media. The first is to educate yourself so that you're not necessarily interviewing someone with a physical a disability and you're kind of going, so what is that then? If they've already been interviewed, if they have a presence online and they write about what, or they have shared information about what that experience is or what it means for them, then do your homework. Don't ask them to do all the work for you. If they're an anti-racist campaigner, find out what they've been doing, find out what anti-racism is, or remind yourself what that is. Don't ask them to kind of do all the educating for you. Be mindful of timings and time commitment. Again, who's benefiting more from representing a more diverse perspective? If it's you or your publication, then be upfront about the time commitment that you're asking for, who's getting what out of it, what timings. Be mindful as well that we are in a secular/Christian majority society. So, for example, you might not call someone up if you're talking to Muslim hikers, for example. You might want to be mindful of when Ramadan, when Eid, when prayers might be held, if it's appropriate or inappropriate. you don't know, you're not expected necessarily to know all the answers to these things, but be mindful that if someone says now's not a great time, that's you need to accommodate that. Be transparent about what it is that you want to write about, what is interesting to you about their story, and meet people's needs. Now, this, for example, is if you have someone with a visual impairment, if you're working with someone who has particular care needs in order to help them look after themselves with a hidden disability, if they have caring commitments, be flexible to accommodate that in a way that is appropriate. Some people with a hidden disability might not want to be that upfront about the things that they need. Maybe they need a break halfway through an interview to go and recharge, go to the loo, sort out personal care, whatever it is. Be accommodating to that. Again, business as usual might not be appropriate or fit for purpose. And so kind of question yourself, not your interviewee. Again, beware of inspirational stories. Anousheh Hussain, who's a rock climber and has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, has talked about this. She's like, I'm really happy to be an inspiration if I am truly inspiring to someone, if I've inspired someone to action, but I don't want to be inspirational simply because I have a disability or because I'm a Muslim woman who wears a hijab and I go rock climbing. That's who I am. That's not inspirational. That's just straight up who I am. And I thought that was really interesting, the idea that inspo porn is written for in her context, able-bodied audience to kind of go, gosh, wow, aren't you brave? Ooh, be very careful about that. And if you find those words coming to your mouth, check yourself. Don't just feature diverse people in stories about diversity. This is a really big one, and it goes back to Pip Millington, it goes back to Trekkers UK. Are you only asking people about what it's like to be a black girl who hikes, or are you asking, what do you love about hiking? What are your routes? Give us some kit reviews, do a route review for us. The fact that you're black is neither here nor there in that context. And actually, that is the next really powerful step to true integration in an inclusive way. Always ask yourself, are you the right person to do the interview, to write the feature? Is it an opportunity to share power and privilege, that unearned advantage that means that I'm in a position where I can often pick up the phone or drop an email to someone and say, oh, I want to do this thing. And they go, oh, yeah, okay. Actually, maybe I use that opportunity to share that power with someone else and help them become and grow into this space. Maybe it's something that you could co-write together. Maybe it's something that actually the storytelling will be much more powerful if you design it or invite it or create it to be an opportunity where you have an ally, an affinity, an interview where there are affinities between the interviewer and the interviewee. So, for example, it might be two black women interviewing one another about their experiences in the hills, not necessarily about their experiences of being black in the hills, but just their experiences of being in the hills. Maybe they want to write about being women in the hills. Sure. And if you go, yes, but you're also black. Sure. But that's not what this feature is about. It's not always about an aspect of identity that you're interested in. It might be a different story that's worth being told. And then the question, again, of what's normally how you do it versus how you might have to do it differently in different circumstances is all about building trust. So this came up when I was making the Finding Our Way podcast for the BMC. I said, well, normally we wouldn't check or kind of run an interview past an interviewee. I wouldn't normally do that. I'd just publish it because they knew what they said. If something comes up and they go, oh, please don't use that bit, of course I wouldn't. But I wouldn't give them final sign off. But in certain circumstances, if you're talking about things that are particularly personal, particularly vulnerable, then you need to find a way that makes that person feel comfortable and builds trust, that they're not going to be used, exploited, it's not going to be tokenistic, that you've done a good job, that they feel good about the content, that they feel proud of the content, and that you are working together in a collaborative way rather than them being exploited, used for you to then generate content that you benefit from and they're left feeling less than ideal and less than positive towards you and towards outdoor media outlets in general. And bear in mind, Sam Leary and Danny's example as a very strong warning. You need to monitor socials, even for the things that you don't expect to be an issue. Sometimes they are going to be an issue because there's a few nasty people out there and you need to be mindful. So if you're representing, for example, Everybody Outdoors, who are a group who represent people who are active in the outdoors, who have bigger bodies or are plus sized, they need to monitor their socials very carefully. All their content is about claiming for greater representation in the outdoors, celebrating their community, building a peer support network, building skills, but they need to monitor their social feed and comments because people are kind of rude. And if you are platforming people who are usually underrepresented, you need to also, in the same way that you would, but perhaps even more so, be more acutely aware of your responsibilities to ensure that that is a safe and welcoming space for all. How do you unpack privilege or unearned advantage? Well, what can I do? It's not my fault that I'm a white, middle-class, able-bodied man who had all the advantages and has a cupboard full of Gore-Tex and technical knowledge of the Cairngorm Plateau. No, it's not. No, it's not. But you can use your unearned advantage to weaken the systems of unearned advantage. You can use your unearned advantage to weaken the systems of unearned advantage, because you have far more power than we've been taught to realise. I was talking to a friend who works in the outdoor media earlier today, and he said, oh, we've got this for a particular client that he works with. There's a WhatsApp group of people who contribute photographs. And there is a majority of men in the group. There are some women. And he realised that when he was asking for photograph submissions on a particular subject, the men would jump forwards and offer their contributions, their photographs, and the women tended not to. And then there was lots of banter and people critiquing the photos and gear placement and the route choices and all the rest of it. And it was all good banter and it was all about community. But actually what it served to do was make certain people in that group feel less able to contribute. And so he got in touch with them separately and said, do you have photos on this particular route or this particular issue or theme? And they said, oh, yeah, we do, but we don't want to contribute there because it's not a very nice space. And what happened was that when other members of the group found out that there was a way to submit that circumvented sharing with the group in the group pool, other men started to get in touch with this person who was running the content, saying, oh, I don't like sharing either, but here are some pictures, here's some assets that I'm happy for you to use. And actually, if you can create a safe space for a minority, in this case it was women, mountaineers, if you can create a safe space, then chances are it's going to benefit the majority as well. And there'll be people who are experiencing the same sense of vulnerability or lack of safety that are inhibited from contributing in ways that you might not identify, because in this circumstance, they're also white straight males who just aren't joining in with the banter. Now, what do you do about that? Well, you call it out, you change the culture. And it's much easier for the white men who are part of the bants to change the culture than it is for the person in the minority position. It's not their job to call out racism. It's not the person of colour's job in the room to call out racism. It's all our jobs. So how else do we do it? Well, we can share our power through sharing time, sometimes sharing money, our energy, our mobility, our connections, our spaces, our travel opportunities. So if it's an opportunity to go up to the hills, maybe invite someone along and they can write a feature as well. It's also changing behaviour, so paying attention. If you're the person who's constantly jumping into the chat and dominating, or you're mates with the person who's jumping in and dominating, have a word. Say, step back, create some space for everyone else. It's sometimes about intervening, sometimes about being speaking up. It's sometimes about asserting, but sometimes it's about deferring to others. So if people approach you as, you know, God's greatest gift to mountains, but actually you realise that Sam Leary or Monique Zafir has something really pertinent to say on that, send them to them and say, actually, I'm not the person you need to talk to on this subject. It's this person. that's genuinely being an active ally, I think. And then it's also about lobbying, campaigning, protesting, organising. In the context of being a freelancer, it's also about, I think, making brave decisions about jobs sometimes. If you are invited, sometimes, you know, it's really hard to say no to stuff. But if you're approached to talk about a subject and to work for a publication or a brand, and they do not align with your values, say no. But then the brave bit is saying why you've said no, not just that you're too busy. Oh, I'd love to, but I can't this time. But actually say, this is problematic for me because this content that you put out makes me uncomfortable because of these reasons. I find this problematic. If you find yourself speaking at an event and you're a panel of all white people, all women, all men, or perhaps all men, maybe make the comment to the organisers that that isn't something that you would support. If you see a short list of writers or photographers shortlisted for an award, for example, there was a climbing competition where all the long-listed photographers were men, make the comment. It doesn't have to be a woman kind of going, hey, hang on a minute, that's not right. It's all our jobs. And it's perhaps even more your job if you're on the shortlist to say, I don't think that we're the only people taking fantastic photographs of climbing at the moment. Where are all the other people who should be contributing, who should be vying for this award? It shouldn't just be for me. Okay, so to conclude, before we go to questions, 3 simple actions to consider. First is to create an action plan. So ask, where are we now? Do that critical audit. Keep doing the critical audit. You don't just do it once, you keep doing it. Then describe a vision of where you'd like to get to. So what does that look like? Is it a change in the roster of writers? Is it a change in representation in the images for your community, for your club, for your magazine, for your podcast? Identify specific actions of how might you get from there to there, and then create a timeline so that you can hold yourself to account. Bear in mind, you can't do it all at once, but you can do something now to start the journey. And the final point I want to make is, when tackling this big, meaty issue of writing inclusion into the outdoors, it's not just about outdoor media, it's about society. It's tricky, it's challenging, it puts us all in a vulnerable place, and we will all make mistakes on that route. Don't let the mistakes define you. Dust yourself down, apologise, make it good, work out what the learning is for next time, and then move on to carry on growing and doing better. I think I'm going to stop there and invite questions and conversation about this subject. Thank you very much. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then you can see my face in bigger. Hi, it's me. What do you think? Do we have questions? I guess that's question 1.
Well, I've been monitoring the chat and we haven't had a great number of questions. What we did have, first of all, is an awful lot of agreement about the things that you were saying as you were saying them, and further examples of situations similar to what you were describing. But that morphed then from people agreeing with what you were saying to people coming up with ideas about what they could do.
Oh, great.
So there's a bit of a change. So, for example, Dhruti Shah said that this isn't actually something positive we can do, it's something helpful that we can do, if that's a real distinction, is that advising people who might be amplified by an article or something to shut down their socials and make them private for a day or two, to cut down on the abuse, which is a sad indication of what it's like if you feel the need to do that. But that is one thing that you might be able to do.
I mean, I certainly think when I come across, and it does mean that I spend more time on social media than I probably would like to, but if I come across something that I don't think is right or representative, or call it out. I mean, if you're in a position where you can call it out, I think you've got a responsibility to, particularly if you're established in the outdoor media. That's the email to the editor saying that's not okay. What you've done there is not cool. And it shouldn't fall to the burden on the person who is being discriminated against or the minority group that this particularly or overwhelmingly affects. The responsibility, I think, lies even more on the majority to say, no, not in our name. That is not cool. Let's stop doing that. Let's do better. This is what better would look like. And we need to kind of hold our publications to account as much as we hold ourselves to account. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And there's been some chat about what OWPG can do. As the Outdoor Writers and Photographers Guild, John Sparks has suggested that maybe we could use some of our on-end advantage, as many of our members have, in mentoring or skill sharing to help other people tell their own stories. David Linton, who is also a member, I think, has suggested that we should be doing more of that. And
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and Claire Maxted has said that she's thinking she could do a how to write an outdoor feature course on here. She gets a lot of submissions from all sorts of people, and a lot of them aren't up to scratch, so she might be able to help people build their skills up so that she can feature a wider range of people, I guess, and wider range of writers.
Yeah, exactly. Now, some of it is how much, I mean, this I'd be really interested, because I'm, as a freelancer, I send in my copy, I send in my invoice, and then I kind of wait for my moment of glory where my stuff gets published. But it would be really interesting to hear from some of the editors who are on the call. Maybe if you're happy to unmute, turn your, oh, hang on, we should let everyone put their pictures on now if they want to.
We should. I'm also very conscious of the fact that it is 5 to 9 now.
Oh God, I chatted on, didn't I? Sorry, everyone. Do people want to unmute themselves and kind of contribute here? Do we want to how much time realistically do editors have to be able to coach and guide early career writers who perhaps don't have the depth of career experience to be able to contribute? I mean, how important, I mean, the frankest question is, how important is it to diversify your roster of writers and photographers that you can invest and are willing to invest in helping people develop that base of expertise and experience to be able to write and publish? Yeah, David, go ahead. Oh, I don't. Oh, yeah.
Mary-Ann, thanks for the talk. That was really fantastic. I enjoyed that. Yeah, so I am a member of the OWPG. I work currently as a deputy editor of a magazine that Mary-Ann also writes for, the Great Outdoors magazine, as well as being a freelancer. And I am a freelancer on that magazine. I'm not paid a paid employee. Yeah, development. I was saying this to some colleagues and peers last night. Developments. I'm in a lucky position at the moment that we have. Effectively, my role is our capacity for that. I think I don't think I do that on my own. Francesca's the new editor, and she does that on the pieces that she works for as well. This is absolutely a discussion we're having currently, and even more so now that we're both relatively new in our own respective roles. Yeah, this is a monthly, if not sometimes weekly, discussion by having, and the development side is absolutely it's also the most enjoyable part of what I do for myself, you know. So there's if you like, it's a two-way process. I learn as well. So yeah, that's so there is capacity. There isn't as much capacity as I'd like, but how long is a piece of string, I guess, is, you know, where I'm a freelancer, and the margins are absolutely tiny.
Yeah. And it's difficult, isn't it? That idea that if you've got, you know, nine slots for a feature, and you go, hang on a minute, we're all white or white passing folks. If one of us steps back, then someone else can step in, but that means that I walk away with no money towards the gas bill this month. And it always feels quite tenuous, doesn't it, that you're only as good as your last commissioned feature, and the lead time means that you kind of want to be able to go on that trip to Skye, and so you need to kind of recoup some costs. And it's difficult, but it becomes quite sort of self-interested, and you find yourself unintentionally being a massive problem because you're a gatekeeper, and you're you know, you're protecting. It becomes self-protection rather than actually being a kind of ally and activist towards something better. That comes with privilege. There's a deep, deep privilege of being able to turn down work and hand it over to someone else. I absolutely acknowledge that.
Could I just interrupt for a moment, please? I'm conscious again of the fact that it's 9 o'clock already. Does anybody have any burning questions that they would like Mary-Ann to answer? If so, if you could just raise your hand so that we can see you.
Alex has got his hand up. Alex.
Right. Okay, thank you. Alex, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your burning question then?
Yes, thanks, Mary-Ann. That was really, really interesting. I was fascinated by your comment earlier on about when referring to various people, the distinction between writing about them or writing with them. So at Sidetrack magazine, we quite often have features which will involve a writer or a photographer. They will go and they will visit an Indigenous group of people, and they will spend some time living with them. But one thing we find really difficult is accessing those voices directly, because obviously there are writers and storytellers within Indigenous groups all around the world, but we find it fantastically difficult to actually get those voices directly. You know, we've tried, and it's often really challenging. So I was wondering if you have any tips.
I guess, I mean, one of the questions perhaps might be for the author, the writer or photographer who's kind of headed over to kind of do that initial feature writing or photography project. It's about trust building, isn't it? As well as about addressing the capacity that people might have, so that if you're, I don't know, taking photographs of folk who are vulnerable to climate change and they are living in precarious positions in sort of geographical terms, and dealing with you know, subsistence farming methods of feeding their kids, then the chances are they might not be in a position to kind of go, sure, I'll pen a few words for you. But maybe it's about planning in advance for that author or photographer to kind of say, look, this commission is contingent on you getting, being able to capture kind of authentic voices from the place that you're going to, which I appreciate is kind of quite a high bar. It means you also need probably very robust and transparent policies on paying contributors. It might mean that you could work, it potentially means that you can share the responsibility between you and that original creator to kind of say, between us, we need to unpack this and resolve it, rather than kind of going, oh, we tried and it was tricky. I mean, one of the basic things is that you kind of get photo captions of a Sami man, whereas actually if you had a kind of white person in Norway, they'd probably have a name. Yeah. And so it's kind of fundamental things of kind of like, what are our baseline expectations? Well, I don't know what their name was and it was hard to write down is not an acceptable response. I don't know, what would you, I think it just requires more effort, but the effort is mandatory, I think would be my kind of summary on that. I don't know if anyone else has other thoughts on it.
I'd welcome other views on that. That's really interesting. Yeah.
Anyone else? Hands up. Hands up.
Yeah. And you can always use the reactions and raise your hand if we're not spotting you. Oh, there's Claire Maxted. You'll need to unmute.
Oh, sorry. Thanks. Yeah, I think that was really good for you to bring that up, Alex. I think it just does take a lot more effort. It takes talking to people like Mary-Ann, coming to talks like this, and then reaching out to communities involved, like all the elements have been mentioned. But yeah, it just takes more effort. Like I was trying to organise before COVID a photo shoot for Bridgedale, and I tried my hardest at that time, with the time I had available, to get a more diverse selection of people. In the end, it was all white people, because I couldn't get people from different communities to come along for days off in the week in the hills in the Lake District. And I did post on social media at that time that it's not good enough and that I should have tried harder, but I did genuinely try. And I'm grateful to Mary-Ann for doing talks like this, and for loads of companies have just been set up, like Alto and all the elements, because now we have got a means to access that more diverse audience. It means you have to pay them sometimes, and it's different to getting white people to come along, and yeah, it's more difficult. And I think if we want to improve diversity, that's just something that we have to do.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes if a brand is pushing, or you kind of even offer a kind of a diverse shortlist, and they kind of go for the same old suspects, or like, oh, we're going to use this, you know, ambassador or athlete. It is really difficult, and it puts you personally. I saw in your comment that you've called out all white materials before, and big organizations haven't liked it. Yeah, it puts yourself in a position of vulnerability, but imagine that kind of aspect of discomfort to the systemic institutional challenge that others feel.
Yeah, I don't mind being put in that position. I just think that's awful behavior on the part of that company.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe as a kind of community of people working in this industry, we can be more supportive and transparent with one another. Now, this isn't a kind of massive pile in with brands that we think are behaving badly, but sometimes, you know, you kind of don't want to put your head above the parapet because you don't want to be the problem person. And actually we go, if we all kind of stand up together, if the OWPG represents to a brand what you're doing isn't acceptable, then we're, as individuals, you know, there's the power in, it's like a union, isn't it? That we have the power of representation without being singled out as a troublemaker who needs to be, you know, surgically removed from the industry, and then you end up being deeply penalised for doing the right thing.
Yeah, it is funny. Both organisations have since done what I suggested anyway.
Oh, well done.
Might not have been just me saying those things, obviously, but one of them still doesn't really like me, and the other one loves me. So it doesn't, yeah.
Well, well done for doing the right thing. I think we need to kind of celebrate the wins as well, and kind of acknowledge when people have done the difficult but right thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
I just want to say something that Dee's written into the chat, because having a problem with their microphone, and then Mohammed has his hand raised for a question, and then we're going to have to draw the event to a close, because otherwise we could go on all night. So first of all, Dee says it's definitely effort and our attitudes. It often feels as if one side is better than the other and just attends to observe, and treats human beings as part of the exotic landscape, which I thought was an interesting phrase. The fear to stand up and become isolated is a massive barrier. Speaking as a whistleblower, and they were penalised quite severely. So, David's written that, David Linton, I'm Spartacus, stand together. This is the role of organisations like OWPG. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking now and hand over to Mohammed for his question, and then to Josephine to just close the meeting. Mohammed, would you like to unmute yourself?
Oh, sorry, I accidentally muted you again. Sorry.
Thanks, Mary-Ann. No, just that question around reaching different communities. That's a question I get asked all the time, around how do you reach, and the way people frame it is hard to reach. And I turn it around with them. Actually, the communities are not hard to reach. It's the services and the journalists and the organizations that are hard to reach. So it's the services that are hard to reach. The communities are all out there. We're all out there either enjoying the outdoors or living in the community. I can be reached if I want to be reached. It's just the organizations are not prepared to reach me and not prepared to engage with me. And I think that's a big challenge. If you want to do things, you might have to do it differently. I think Claire mentioned they can't do weekends. Well, actually, you have to work weekend if you want to reach some of those communities, or you have to work late at nights. I did a piece of research several years ago where I had to go out to nighttime economy and research them at 10 o'clock at night, because that's the time that they will engage with me. If I go at 2 or 3 o'clock, they're not going to engage. So I think there's an element of laziness amongst people to say, well, who's the easiest to get hold of? Let's go to this organization. We always go to them and they'll provide somebody, rather than actually going into those communities, building up trust and engaging with them. And the communities are out there and they're willing to talk to you. It's just, I think there's lazy journalism going on here, as with a lot of organization. It's like, we only work 9 to 5. We can't do anything later on in the evening. It's all this comes into being, or we can't work weekends. And I think there's an element of, and the same with the whole outdoor. You go out into the lakes or the peaks or wherever, you come on a Saturday night or a Friday night or a Sunday night, it's full of people from diverse backgrounds. But if you come in the daytime, you won't see them anywhere. And it's actually thinking how different demographics visit the outdoors and how they access and use the outdoors, rather than thinking I'll only use the typical people. So I think there's a lot of work to do amongst organizations and journalists to actually spread their wings and do something different, rather than thinking this is the way we do it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. And picking up from Claire's point, Claire Maxted's point, of kind of, you've got this commission, so you kind of hustle to try and get a kind of a diverse roster. We need to kind of move away from that reactive space and actually kind of say, in terms of building trust and being more connected to the diversity of communities and storytellers that we really ought to be, it's about building trust and being in it for the long term. It's not kind of going, oh, hang on a minute, we haven't got a story about a diverse person doing something diversity-ish, quick, or we haven't got any pictures of people of color going, canoeing, quick, what should we do? Let's try and find a black or brown person who's has a canoe. If you've actually kind of got much more authentic relations with those groups, with communities, with community leaders, with people who are actively and sort of committedly working in these spaces, then they trust you because you're constantly there. You're not just fishing in for something that you need and exploiting and then off you go again. Thank you very much. I'm happy carrying on with business as usual. So I think you're right. It's a degree of lazy, which is harsh because budgets are tight, and I don't think there's a millionaire on this call, is there? We're to some extent it's hand to mouth. Sometimes it's about us calling out brands or publications who are paying such small fees that you go, actually, I can't do this job properly, because the proper job requires more resource from you in terms of support, more resource from me in terms of the time to get the right contributors. But as, I guess, practitioners of our art, it's part of my job, part of our jobs, to establish those much broader, genuine and trusted on both sides relations, so that we do know what stories are out there to be told and what people are active in the outdoors. And trying hard to do the right thing, but not having a lot of time. Yes, you're right. Lazy is harsh. But again, sometimes I guess the kind of the privilege of not having to have to do it sometimes is difficult.
Okay, thank you very much, Mohammed and Mary-Ann. And I'm going to hand over now to Josephine just to close the call.
Hi. First of all, thank you, Mary-Ann, for that session. Well researched, alarming, inspiring, exciting and hopeful. And I feel we're still a very long way from when these labels will become unnecessary, which is what I hope for eventually. We must all ask what we can do. And for myself, the only thing that I can think I can do right now is once this link is up and running, I will send and promote this presentation to all the leading commissioning editors of all the major outdoor magazines. See if they will take the time out to actually have a look at it. The OWPG can learn from this as well, mentoring. And it's as much about making choices and making more effort. In some ways, we have to be better than average to make this work. And we need commissioning editors to rise above mere financial constraints. But a lot to think about, and time to sort of hold up the mirror. So this presentation, we're going to put it on YouTube. We'll email a link out to everyone. Somebody's asked if there's a way of networking. Obviously, there's the OWPG. You can look at the website to join. But I will make sure that everyone can network together separately if they want to. I'll work that out afterwards. As a follow-up to this, we want to put together another open Zoom event with some commissioning editors, maybe later in the summer. Just look at the website for details. It's yet to be put together, but it just seems an obvious response to this to get a viewpoint from some commissioning editors directly. So it just remains for me to say a huge thank you to Mary-Ann. Absolutely brilliant. I'm deeply impressed and deeply grateful for that. Thank you to the OWPG members who have pitched in, also who have managed this event very well. And everybody, thank you for you taking time out to attend. So I'll just say, stay safe, see you on the hill, and let's stay in touch. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Josephine.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye then.